the sketch of the mythology.
In the beginning, Eru, the One, who in the Elvish tongue is named Iluvatar, made the Ainur of his thought, and they made a great music before him. In this music the world was begun, until in the midst of the splendors of the world, its vast halls and spaces and its wheeling fires, there came to be that hour and that place where the Ainur made the habitation of the children of Iluvatar, in the deeps of time, and in the midst of the innumerable stars. The great among these spirits the elves name the Valar, the powers, and men have often called them gods. Chief among the Ainur in this tale are Manwe, whose delight is in the winds and the clouds. All swift birds, strong of wing, he loves, and they come and go at his bidding. And he was appointed to be the vice-regent of Iluvatar, king of the world of Valar, and the children of Iluvatar, and the chief defense against the evil of Melkor. With Manwe dwells Varda, queen of the Valar, maker of the stars. Of all the great ones who dwell in this world, the elves hold Varda most in reverence and love. Elbereth they name her, and they call upon her name out of the shadows of Middle-earth, and uplift it in song at the rising of the stars. Mandos is the keeper of the houses of the dead, and the summoner of the spirits of the slain, and he knows all things that shall be, save only those that lie still in the freedom of Iluvatar. He is the doomsman of the Valar, but he pronounces his dooms and his judgments only at the bidding of Manwe. The mightiest of those Ainur who came into the world was in his beginning Melkor, but that name he has forfeited, and the children of Iluvatar, who suffered most from his malice, will not utter it, and they name him Morgoth, the dark enemy of the world, he who rose discord in uproar against the great music of the Ainur, and contended with it, for he desired rather to subdue to his will the children of Iluvatar, envying the gifts with which Iluvatar promised to endow them, and he wished himself to have subjects and servants, and to be called Lord, and to be a master over other wills. Now the children of Iluvatar are elves and men, the firstborn and the followers. For the children of Iluvatar were conceived by him alone, and none of the Ainur had part in their making. Therefore, when they beheld them, the more did the Ainur love them, being things other than themselves, strange and free, wherein they saw the mind of Iluvatar reflected anew, and learned yet a little more of his wisdom. Immortal were the elves, and their wisdom waxed from age to age, for the elves die not till the world dies, and their love of the earth and all the world is more single and more poignant therefore, and as the years lengthen ever more sorrowful. No sickness nor pestilence brought death to them. Their bodies, indeed, could not be destroyed, unless they are slain or waste in grief, and to both these seeming deaths they are subject. Neither does age subdue their strength, unless one grow weary of 10,000 centuries, and dying they are gathered to the halls of Mandos in Valinor, whence they may in time return to Middle-earth once more. Men were more frail, more easily slain by weapon or mischance, and less easily healed, subject to sickness and many ills, and they grew old and died. Yet the elves believe that men are often a grief to Manwe, for it seems to the elves that men resembled Morgoth most of all the Ainur, although he has ever feared and hated them, even those that served him. It is one with this gift of freedom that the children of men dwell only a short space in the world alive, and are not bound to it, and depart soon whither the elves know not. Some say that they too go to the halls of Mandos, but none have ever come back from the mansions of the dead, For the sons of men die indeed, and leave the world. Wherefore they are called the guests, or the strangers. Death is their fate, the gift of Iluvatar, which as time wears even the powers shall envy. Yet of old the Valar declared to the elves in Valinor that men shall join in the second music of the Ainur, whereas Iluvatar has not revealed what he purposes for the elves after the world's end, and Morgoth has not discovered it. Of the Silmarils.
In those far days Feanor began on a time a long and marvellous labour, and all his power and all his subtle magic he called upon, for he purposed to make a thing more fair than any of the elves yet had made, that should last beyond the end of all. 3 jewels he made, and named them Silmarils. A living fire burned within them that was blended of the light of the 2 trees. Of their own radiance they shone even in the dark. No mortal flesh impure could touch them, but was withered and was scorched. These jewels the elves prized beyond all the works of their hands, and Varda hallowed them, and Mandos said, "The fate of the elves is locked herein, and the fate of many things beside." The heart of Feanor was wound about the things he himself had made.
A terrible and deeply destructive oath was sworn by Feanor and his 7 sons, in assertion of their sole and inviolable right to the Silmarils, which were stolen by Morgoth.
Of Beren and Luthien. Among the tales of sorrow and of ruin that come down to us from the darkness of those days, there are yet some in which amid weeping there is joy, and under the shadow of death light that endures. And of these histories most fair still in the ears of the elves is the tale of Beren and Luthien. Of their lives was made the Lay of Leithian, Release from Bondage, which is the longest save one of the songs concerning the world of old. It has been told that Barahir would not forsake Dorthonion, and there Morgoth pursued him to the death, until at last there remained to him only 12 companions.
Such deeds of daring there they wrought, that soon the hunters that them sought at rumour of their coming fled. Though price was set upon each head to match the weregild of a king, no soldier could to Morgoth bring news even of their hidden lair, for where the highland brown and bare above the darkling pines arose of steep Dorthonion to the snows and barren mountain winds, there lay a tarn of water, blue by day, by night a mirror of dark glass for stars of Elbereth that pass above the world into the west. Once hallowed, still that place was blessed. No shadow of Morgoth, and no evil thing yet thither came. A whispering ring of slender birches silver-grey stooped on its margin. Round it lay a lonely moor, and the bare bones of ancient earth like standing stones thrust through the heather and the whin. And there by houseless Ailuin, the hunted lord and faithful men under the grey stones made their den. Of Gorlim unhappy. Gorlim unhappy, Angrim's son, as the tale tells, of these was one, most fierce and hopeless. He to wife, while fair was the fortune of his life, took the white maiden Eilinel. Dear love they had ere evil fell. To war he rode, from war returned to find his fields and homestead burned. His house forsaken roofless stood, empty amid the leafless wood, and Eilinel, white Eilinel, was taken whither none could tell, to death or thraldom far away. Black was the shadow of that day for ever on his heart, and doubt still gnawed him as he went about in wilderness wandering, or at night oft sleepless, thinking that she might ere evil came have timely fled into the woods. She was not dead, she lived, she would return again to seek him, and would deem him slain. Therefore at whiles he left the lair, and secretly alone would peril dare, and come to his old house at night, broken and cold, without fire or light, and naught but grief renewed would gain, watching and waiting there in vain. In vain, or worse. For many spies had Morgoth, many lurking eyes well used to pierce the deepest dark, and Gorlim's coming they would mark and would report. There came a day when once more Gorlim crept that way down the deserted weedy lane at dusk of autumn, sad with rain and cold wind whining. Lo, a light at window fluttering in the night, amazed he saw, and drawing near between faint hope and sudden fear, he looked within. 'Twas Eillinell. Though changed she was, he knew her well. With grief and hunger she was worn, her tresses tangled, raiment torn. Her gentle eyes with tears were dim, as soft she wept, Gorlim, Gorlim, thou canst not have forsaken me, then slain, alas, thou slain must be, and I must linger cold, alone, and loveless as a barren stone. One cry he gave, and then the light blew out, and in the wind of night wolves howled, and on his shoulder fell suddenly the griping hands of hell. There Morgoth's servants fast him caught, and he was cruelly bound, and brought to Sauron, captain of the host, the lord of werewolf and of ghost, most foul and fell of all who knelt at Morgoth's throne. In might he dwelt on Gowerhoth Isle, but now had ridden with strength abroad, by Morgoth bidden to find the rebel Barahir. He sat in dark encampment near, and thither his butchers dragged their prey. There now in anguish Gorlim lay, with bond on neck, on hand and foot. To bitter torment he was put, to break his will and him constrain to buy with treason end of pain. But naught to them would he reveal of Barahir, nor break the seal of faith that on his tongue was laid, until at last a pause was made, and one came softly to his stake, a darkling form that stooped and spake to him of Eillinell his wife. Wouldst thou forsake thy life, who with few words might win release for her and thee, and go in peace, and dwell together far from war, friends of the king? What wouldst thou more? And Gorlim, now long worn with pain, yearning to see his wife again, whom well he weened was also caught in Sauron's net, allowed the thought to grow, and faltered in his troth. Then straight, half willing and half loath, they brought him to the seat of stone where Sauron sat. He stood alone before that dark and dreadful face, and Sauron said, "Come, mortal base, what do I hear? That thou wouldst dare to barter with me? Well, speak fair. What is thy price?" And Gorlim low bowed down his head, and with great woe, word on slow word, at last implored that merciless and faithless lord, that he might free depart, and might again find Eillinell the White, and dwell with her, and cease from war against the king. He craved no more. Then Sauron smiled and said, "Thou thrall, the price thou askest is but small for treachery and shame so great. I grant it surely. Well, I wait. Come, speak now swiftly, and speak true." Then Gorlim wavered, and he drew half back, but Sauron's daunting eye there held him, and he dared not lie. As he began, so must he wend from first false step to faithless end. He all must answer as he could, betray his lord and brotherhood, and cease and fall upon his face. Then Sauron laughed aloud. "Thou base, thou cringing worm, stand up and hear me, and now drink the cup that I have sweetly blent for thee. Thou fool, a phantom thou didst see, that I, Sauron, made to snare thy lovesick wits. Naught else was there. Cold 'tis with Sauron's wraiths to wed. Thy Eillinell, she is long since dead. Dead, food of worms less low than thou. And yet thy boon I grant thee now. To Eilunel thou soon shalt go, and lie in her bed, no more to know of war or manhood. Have thy pay. And Gorlim then they dragged away, and cruelly slew him, and at last in the dank mould his body cast, where Eilunel long since had lain in the burned woods by butchers slain. Thus Gorlim died an evil death, and cursed himself with dying breath, and Barahir at last was caught in Morgoth's snare, for set at naught by treason was the ancient grace that guarded long that lonely place, Tarn Ailuin. Now all laid bare were secret paths and hidden lair. Of Beren, son of Barahir, and his escape.
In this way the hiding of Barahir was revealed, and Morgoth drew his net about it, and the orcs, coming in the still hours before dawn, surprised the men of Dorthonion, and slew them all, save one. For Beren, son of Barahir, had been sent by his father on a perilous errand to spy upon the ways of the enemy, and he was far afield when the lair was taken. But as he slept benighted in the forest, he dreamed that carrion birds sat thick as leaves upon bare trees beside a mere, and blood dripped from their beaks. Then Beren was aware in his dream of a form that came to him across the water, and it was a wraith of Gorlim, and it spoke to him, declaring his treachery and death, and bade him make haste to warn his father. Then Beren awoke, and sped through the night, and came back to the lair of the outlaws on the second morning. But as he drew near, the carrion birds rose from the ground, and sat in the alder trees beside Tarn Ailuin, and croaked in mockery. There Beren buried his father's bones, and raised a cairn of boulders above him, and swore upon it an oath of vengeance. First, therefore, he pursued the orcs that had slain his father and his kinsmen, and he found their camp by night at Rivil's well above the fen of Serech. And because of his woodcraft he came near to their fire unseen. There their captain made boast of his deeds, and he held up the hand of Barahir that he had cut off as a token for Sauron that their mission was fulfilled.
Now, mates, he cried, here's mine, and I'll not be denied, though few be like it in the land. For I 'twas wrenched it from the hand of that same Barahir I slew, the robber knave. If tales be true, he had it of some elvish lord for the rogue service of his sword. No help it gave him, he's dead. They're parlous elvish rings, 'tis said. Still for the gold I'll keep it, yea, and so eke out my niggard pay. Old Sauron bade me bring it back. And yet methinks he has no lack of weightier treasures in his hoard. The greater, the greedier the lord. So mark ye, mates, ye all shall swear the hand of Barahir was bare. And as he spoke, an arrow sped from tree behind, and forward, dead, choking, he fell with barb in throat. With leering face the earth he smote. Forth then as wolfhound grim there leapt Beren among them. Two he swept aside with sword, caught up the ring, slew one who grasped him, with a spring back into shadow passed, and fled before their yells of wrath and dread of ambush in the valley rang. Then after him like wolves they sprang, howling and cursing, gnashing teeth, hewing and bursting through the heath, shooting wild arrows sheaf on sheaf at trembling shade or shaken leaf. In fateful hour was Beren born. He laughed at dart and wailing horn, fleetest of foot of living men, tireless on fell and light on fen, elf-wise in wood he passed away, defended by his hauberk grey, of dwarvish craft in Nogrod made, where hammers rang in caverns shade.
Thereafter, for 4 years more, Beren wandered still upon Dorthonion, a solitary outlaw, but he became the friend of birds and beasts, and they aided him, and did not betray him, and from that time forth he ate no flesh, nor slew any living thing that was not in the service of Morgoth. He did not fear death, but only captivity, and being bold and desperate, he escaped both death and bonds, and the deeds of lonely daring that he achieved were noised abroad throughout Beleriand, and the tale of them came even into Doriath. At length Morgoth set a price upon his head no less than the price upon the head of Fingon, High King of the Noldor. But the orcs fled rather at the rumour of his approach than sought him out. Therefore an army was sent against him under the command of Sauron, and Sauron brought werewolves, fell beasts inhabited by dreadful spirits that he had imprisoned in their bodies. All that land was now become filled with evil, and all clean things were departing from it, and Beren was pressed so hard that at last he was forced to flee from Dorthonion.
At bay he stood aghast, and knew that he must die at last, or flee the land of Barahir, his land beloved. Beside the mere, beneath a heap of nameless stones, must crumble those once mighty bones, forsaken by both son and kin, bewailed by reeds of Ailuin. The ruin of Dorthonion, Tarn Ailuin and its water wan, never again to look upon. No more shall hidden bowstring sing, no more his shaven arrows wing, no more his hunted head shall lie upon the heath beneath the sky. The northern stars, whose silver fire of old men named the burning briar, were set behind his back, and shone o'er land forsaken. He was gone. Southward he turned, and south away his long and lonely journey lay, while ever loomed before his path the dreadful peaks of Gorgoroth. Never had foot of man most bold yet trod those mountains steep and cold, nor climbed upon their sudden brink, whence sickened eyes must turn and shrink to see their southward cliffs fall sheer, in rocky pinnacle and pier, down into shadows that were laid before the sun and moon were made. In valleys woven with deceit and washed with waters bitter-sweet, dark magic lurked in gulf and glen. But out, away beyond the ken of mortal sight, the eagle's eye from dizzy towers that pierced the sky might, grey and gleaming, see afar, a sheen on water under star, Beleriand, Beleriand, the borders of the elven land.
And climbing into the high regions of Gorgoroth, the mountains of terror, he descried afar the land of Doriath. There it was put into his heart that he would go down into the hidden kingdom, where no mortal foot had yet trodden. Terrible was his southward journey. Sheer were the precipices of Ered Gorgoroth, and beneath their feet were shadows that were laid before the rising of the moon. Beyond lay the wilderness of Dun Gortheb, where the sorcery of Sauron and the power of Melian came together, and horror and madness walked. There spiders of the fell race of Ungoliant abode, spinning their unseen webs in which all living things were snared, and monsters wandered there that were born in the long dark before the sun, hunting silently with many eyes. No food for elves or men was there in that haunted land, but death only. That journey is not accounted least among the great deeds of Beren, but he spoke of it to no one after, lest the horror return into his mind. And none know how he found a way, and so came by paths that no man nor elf else ever dared to tread to the borders of Doriath. And he passed through the mazes that Melian wove about the kingdom of Thingol, even as she had foretold, for a great doom lay upon him.
The Tale of Tinuviel. Luthien was a maiden, and the most beautiful of all the maidens of the hidden elves. And indeed few have been so fair, for her mother was a fay, a daughter of the gods. A friend had Luthien then. Dairon was then a boy strong and merry, and above all things he delighted to play upon a pipe of reeds or other woodland instruments. But Luthien's joy was rather in the dance, and no names are set with hers for the beauty and subtlety of her twinkling feet. Now it was the delight of Dairon and Luthien to fare away from the cavernous palace, and together spend long times amid the trees. There often would Dairon sit upon a tussock or a tree root and make music, while Luthien danced there too. Even at night when the moon shone pale, still would they play and dance. And they were not afraid, as I should be. Morgoth troubled them not as yet, and men were hemmed beyond the hills. Now the place that they loved the most was a shady spot, and elms grew there, and beech too, but these were not very tall, and some chestnut trees there were with white flowers, but the ground was moist, and a great misty growth of hemlocks rose beneath the trees. On a time of June they were playing there, and the white umbels of the hemlocks were like a cloud about the boles of the trees. And there danced Luthien until the evening faded late, and there were many white moths abroad. Luthien minded them not, as many of the children of men do, although she loved not beetles, and spiders will none of the Eldar touch. But now the white moths flitted about her head, and Dairon trilled an eerie tune, when suddenly that strange thing befell.
Enchantment healed his weary feet, that o'er hills were doomed to roam, and forth he hastened strong and fleet, and grasped at moonbeams glistening, through woven woods in elven home, she lightly fled on dancing feet, and left him lonely still to roam in the silent forest listening. He heard thereof the flying sound of feet as light as linden leaves, or music welling on the ground in hidden hollows quavering. Now withered lay the hemlock sheaves, and one by one with sighing sound, whispering fell the Bishan leaves in the wintry woodland wavering.
It is told in the Lay of Leithian that Beren came stumbling into Doriath grey and bowed, as with many years of woe, so great had been the torment of the road. But wandering in the summer in the woods of Neldoreth, he came upon Luthien, daughter of Thingol and Melian, but she vanished from his sight, and he became dumb as one that is bound under a spell, and he strayed long in the woods, wild and wary as a beast, seeking for her. In his heart he called her Tinuviel, that signifies nightingale, daughter of twilight, in the grey elven tongue, for he knew no other name for her.
By dawn and dusk he sought her, but ever more hopefully when the moon shone bright. At last one night he caught a sparkle afar off, and lo, there she was, dancing alone on a little treeless knoll. Often and often she came thereafter, and danced and sang to herself, and then Beren watched from the wood's edge afar. Indeed, for long Luthien knew of his coming, and feigned otherwise. And for long her fear had departed by reason of the wistful hunger of his face, lit by the moonlight. And she saw that he was kind, and in love with her beautiful dancing. Then Beren took to following Luthien secretly through the woods, even to the entrance of the cave and the bridge's head. And when she was gone in, he would cry across the stream, softly saying, Tinuviel. And although he knew it not, Luthien often hearkened from within the shadows of the cavernous doors, and laughed softly or smiled.
He sought her ever, wandering far, where leaves of years were thickly strewn, by light of moon and ray of star, in frosty heaven shivering. Her mantle glinted in the moon, as on a hilltop high and far she danced, and at her feet was strewn a mist of silver quivering. When winter passed, she came again, and her song released the sudden spring, like rising lark and falling rain, and melting water bubbling. He saw the elven flowers spring about her feet, and healed again. He longed by her to dance and sing upon the grass untroubling. Again she fled, but swift he came, Tinuviel, Tinuviel. He called her by her elvish name, and there she halted, listening. One moment stood she, and the spell his voice laid on her barren came, and doom fell on Tinuviel, that in his arms lay glistening.
Tinuviel, teach me to dance. Who art thou? Said she. Beren, I am from across the bitter hills. Then if thou wouldst dance, follow me, said the maiden. And she danced before Beren away and away into the woods, nimbly and yet not so fast that he could not follow. And ever and anon she would look back and laugh at him, stumbling after, saying, Dance, Beren, dance as they dance beyond the bitter hills.
As Beren looked into her eyes, within the shadows of her hair, the trembling starlight of the skies, he saw their mirror shimmering. Tinuviel, the elven fair, immortal maiden, elven wise, about him cast her shadowy hair, and arms like silver gleam
and long ago in the hidden kingdom she laid her hand in his. Thereafter often she came to him, and they went in secret through the woods together from spring to summer, and no others of the children of Iluvatar have had joy so great, though the time was brief. But Daeron the minstrel also loved Luthien, and he espied her meetings with Beren, and betrayed them to Thingol. Then the king was filled with anger, for Luthien he loved above all things, setting her above all the princes of the elves, whereas mortal men he did not even take into his service. Therefore he spoke in grief and amazement to Luthien, but she would reveal nothing, until he swore an oath to her that he would neither slay Beren nor imprison him. But he sent his servants to lay hands on him, and lead him to Menegroth as a malefactor. And Luthien, forestalling them, led Beren herself before the throne of Thingol, as if he were an honoured guest. Then Thingol looked upon Beren in scorn and anger. But Melian was silent. "Who are you," said the king, "that come hither as a thief and unbidden dare to approach my throne?" But Beren, being filled with dread, for the splendour of Menegroth and the majesty of Thingol were very great, answered nothing. Therefore Luthien spoke and said, "He is Beren, son of Barahir, lord of men, mighty foe of Morgoth, the tale of whose deeds has become a song even among the elves." "Let Beren speak," said Thingol. "What would you here, unhappy mortal? And for what cause have you left your own land to enter this which is forbidden to such as you? Can you show reason why my power should not be laid on you in heavy punishment for your insolence and folly?" Then Beren, looking up, beheld the eyes of Luthien, and his glance went also to the face of Melian. And it seemed to him that words were put into his mouth. Fear left him, and the pride of the eldest house of men returned to him, and he said, "My fate, O king, led me hither, through perils such as few even of the elves would dare. And here I have found what I sought not indeed, but finding I would possess for ever. For it is above all gold and silver, and beyond all jewels. Neither rock, nor steel, nor the fires of Morgoth, nor all the powers of the elf kingdoms shall keep from me the treasure that I desire. For Luthien, your daughter, is the fairest of all the children of the world." Then silence fell upon the hall, for those that stood there were astounded and afraid, and they thought that Beren would be slain. But Thingol spoke slowly, saying, "Death you have earned with these words, and death you should find suddenly had I not sworn an oath in haste, of which I repent, base-born mortal, who in the realm of Morgoth has learned to creep in secret as his spies and thralls." Then Beren answered, "Death you can give me earned or unearned, but the names I will not take from you of base-born, nor spy, nor thrall. By the ring of Felagund that he gave to Barahir my father on the battlefields of the north, my house has not earned such names from any elf, be he king or no." His words were proud, and all eyes looked upon the ring, for he held it now aloft, and the green jewels gleamed there that the Noldor had devised in Valinor. For this ring was like to twin serpents, whose eyes were emeralds, and their heads met beneath a crown of golden flowers, that the one upheld and the other devoured. That was the badge of Finarfin and his house. But Thingol looked in silence upon Luthien, and he thought in his heart, "Unhappy men, children of little lords and brief kings, shall such as these lay hands on you and yet live?" Then Melian leaned to Thingol's side, and in whispered counsel bade him forego his wrath. "For not by you," she said, "shall Beren be slain, and far and free does his fate lead him in the end, yet it is wound with yours. Take heed." Then, breaking the silence, he said, "I see the ring, son of Barahir, and I perceive that you are proud and deem yourself mighty. But a father's deeds, even had his service been rendered to me, avail not to win the daughter of Thingol and Melian. See now, I too desire a treasure that is withheld. For rock and steel and the fires of Morgoth keep the jewel that I would possess against all the powers of the elf kingdoms. Yet I hear you say that bonds such as these do not daunt you. Go your way, therefore. Bring to me in your hand a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown, and then, if she will, Luthien may set her hand in yours. Then you shall have my jewel, and though the fate of Arda lie within the Silmarils, yet you shall hold me generous." Thus he wrought the doom of Doriath, and was ensnared within the curse of Mandos. And those that heard these words perceived that Thingol would save his oath, and yet send Beren to his death. For they knew that not all the power of the Noldor, before the siege was broken, had availed even to see from afar the shining Silmarils of Feanor. For they were set in the Iron Crown, and treasured in Angband above all wealth, and Balrogs were about them, and countless swords, and strong bars, and unassailable walls, and the dark majesty of Morgoth. But Beren laughed. "Ha! For little price," he said, "do elven kings sell their daughters, for gems and things made by craft. But if this be your will, Thingol, I will perform it. And when we meet again, my hand shall hold a Silmaril from the Iron Crown, for you have not looked the last upon Beren, son of Barahir." Then he looked in the eyes of Melian, who spoke not, and he bade farewell to Luthien Tinuviel, and bowing before Thingol and Melian, he put aside the guards about him, and departed from Menegroth alone. Then at last Melian spoke, and she said to Thingol, "O king, you have devised cunning counsel, but if my eyes have not lost their sight, it is ill for you whether Beren fail in his errand or achieve it. For you have doomed either your daughter or yourself, and now is Doriath drawn within the fate of a mightier realm." But Thingol answered, "I sell not to elves or men those whom I love and cherish above all treasure. And if there were hope or fear that Beren should come ever back alive to Menegroth, he should not have looked again upon the light of heaven, though I had sworn it." But Luthien was silent, and from that hour she sang not again in Doriath. A brooding silence fell upon the woods, and the shadows lengthened in the kingdom of Thingol.
Now that fair maiden wept for a very great while after Beren's departure, and danced no more about the woods. And Dairon grew angry and could not understand her. But she had grown to love the face of Beren, and his voice that called wistfully, "Tinuviel, Tinuviel," across the stream before her father's doors, she longed to hear again. And she would not now dance when Beren was fled and maybe had already perished. So bitter did this thought become at last, Tinuviel pondered much what she might do. And going to Dairon, she begged him to aid her, for to her father she dared not go, nor even suffer him to see her weep. But Dairon thought with little love of Beren, and he said, "Wherefore should I go into the direst peril that there is in the world for the sake of a wandering man of the woods? Indeed, I have no love for him, for he has destroyed our play together, our music and our dancing." But Dairon, moreover, told the king of what Luthien desired of him, and this he did not of ill intent, but fearing lest Luthien fare away to her death in the madness of her heart. Now when Thingol heard this, he called Luthien and said, "Wherefore, O maiden of mine, dost thou not put this folly away from thee, and seek to do my bidding?" But Luthien would not answer, and the king bade her promise him that neither would she think more on Beren, nor would she seek in her folly to follow after him to the evil lands, whether alone or tempting any of his folk with her. But Tinuviel said that the first she would not promise, and the second only in part, for she would not tempt any of the folk of the woodlands to go with her. Then was her father mightily angry, and beneath his anger not a little amazed and afraid, for he loved Luthien. But Luthien wept suddenly. "'Twas ill done, O my father," she cried, "to send one to his death with thy sorry jesting. For now methinks he will attempt the deed, being maddened by thy scorn, and none will look ever again with such love upon my dancing." Then said the king, It is well for him that he lies not bound here in grievous spells for his trespass in my halls and for his insolent speech." Yet Melian said naught. Neither did she chide Tinuviel, or question her sudden weeping for this wanderer. But this was the plan he devised, for he might not shut his daughter forever in the caverns where only a dim and flickering light ever came. Now above the portals of his cavernous hall was a steep slope falling to the river, and there grew mighty beeches, and one there was that was named Hirilorn, the queen of trees, for she was very mighty, and so deeply cloven was her bole that it seemed as if 3 shafts sprang from the ground together, and they were of like size, round and straight, and their grey rind was smooth as silk, unbroken by branch or twig for a very great height above men's heads. The king let build high up in that strange tree, as high as men could fashion their longest ladders to reach, a little house of wood, and it was above the first branches and was sweetly veiled in leaves, and at each corner was one of the shafts of Hirilorn. There then did the king bid Luthien dwell until she would consent to be wise, and when she fared up the ladders of tall pine, these were taken from beneath, and no way had she to get down again. And the king promised death to any who left one leaning against the tree, or who should try by stealth to place one there at night. All that she required was brought to her. A guard, therefore, was set nigh the tree's foot, and yet came Dairon often thither in sorrow at what he had brought to pass. For he was lonely without Luthien, and Luthien would gaze out of her little window while Dairon made his sweetest melodies beneath. Beren, however, going from before the face of the king, was carried by his wrath far through the woods. Only then did he feel his weariness and stay his march, and thereafter did his greater travails begin. Nights of deep despondency were his, and he saw no hope whatever in his quest, and indeed there was little. The greatest fears assailed him. Wolves roamed about, and more fearsome still were the wandering bands of the goblins and the orcs, snaring and capturing beasts and men and elves, and dragging them to their lord. Hunger and thirst, too, tortured him often, and often he would have turned back had not that been well nigh as perilous as going on. But the voice of Tinuviel pleading with her father echoed in his heart, and at night time it seemed to him that his heart heard her sometimes weeping softly for him, far away in the woodlands of her home. And this was indeed true.
It is told in the Lay of Leithian that Beren passed through Doriath and came at length to the region of the twilight meres and the fens of Sirion. And leaving Thingol's land, he climbed the hills above the falls of Sirion, where the river plunged underground with great noise. Thence he looked westward, and through the mist and rains that lay upon the hills, he saw Talath Dirnan, the guarded plain, stretching between Sirion and Narog. Upon all that plain the elves of Nargothrond kept unceasing watch, and every hill upon its borders was crowned with hidden towers, and through all its woods and fields archers ranged secretly and with great craft. Their arrows were sure and deadly, and nothing crept there against their will. Therefore, ere Beren had come far upon his road, they were aware of him, and his death was nigh. But knowing his danger, he held ever aloft the ring of Felagund, and though he saw no living thing, because of the stealth of the hunters, he felt that he was watched, and he cried often aloud, "I am Beren, son of Barahir, friend of Felagund. Take me to the king." They waylaid him and commanded him to halt. But seeing the ring, they bowed before him, though he was in evil plight, wild and wayworn, and they led him northward and westward, going by night lest their paths should be revealed. For at that time there was no ford or bridge over the torrent of Narog before the gates of Nargothrond. Thus Beren came before King Finrod Felagund, and Felagund knew him, needing no ring to remind him of the kin of Beor and of Barahir. Behind closed doors they sat, and Beren told of the death of Barahir, and of all that had befallen him in Doriath, and he wept, recalling Tinuviel and their joy together. But Felagund heard his tale in wonder and disquiet, and he knew that the oath he had sworn was come upon him for his death, as long before he had foretold to Galadriel. He spoke then to Beren in heaviness of heart. "It is plain that Thingol desires your death, but it seems that this doom goes beyond his purpose, and that the oath of Feanor is again at work. For the Silmarils are cursed with an oath of hatred, and he that even names them in desire moves a great power from slumber." Then King Felagund spoke before his people, recalling the deeds of Barahir and his vow, and he declared that it was laid upon him to aid the son of Barahir in his need, and he sought the help of his chieftains. Then Celegorm arose amid the throng, and drawing his sword he cried, "Be he friend or foe, whether demon of Morgoth or elf or child of men, or any other living thing in Arda, neither law, nor love, nor league of hell, nor might of the Valar, nor any power of wizardry, shall defend him from the pursuing hate of Feanor's sons, if he take or find a Silmaril and keep it. For the Silmarils we alone claim, until the world ends." Many other words he spoke, as potent as were long before in Tirion the words of his father that first inflamed the Noldor to rebellion. And after Celegorm, Curufin spoke, more softly, but with no less power, conjuring in the minds of the elves a vision of war and the ruin of Nargothrond. So great a fear did he set in their hearts, that never after until the time of Turin would any elf of that realm go into open battle, but with stealth and ambush, with wizardry and venomed dart, they pursued all strangers, forgetting the bonds of kinship. Thus they fell from the valour and freedom of the elves of old, and their land was darkened. And now they murmured that Finarfin's son was not as a Valar to command them, and they turned their faces from him. But the curse of Mandos came upon the brothers, and dark thoughts arose in their hearts, thinking to send forth Felagund alone to his death, and to usurp, it might be, the throne of Nargothrond, for they were of the eldest line of the princes of the Noldor. And Felagund, seeing that he was forsaken, took from his head the silver crown of Nargothrond, and cast it at his feet, saying, "Your oaths of faith to me you may break, but I must hold my bond. Yet if there be any on whom the shadow of our curse has not yet fallen, I should find at least a few to follow me, and should not go hence as a beggar that is thrust from the gates." There were 10 that stood by him, and the chief of them, who was named Edrahil, stooping, lifted the crown, and asked that it be given to a steward until Felagund's return. "For you remain my king and theirs," he said, "whatever betide." Then Felagund gave the crown of Nargothrond to Orodreth to govern in his stead, and Celegorm and Curufin said nothing, but they smiled and went from the halls. On an evening of autumn, Felagund and Beren set out from Nargothrond with their 10 companions, and they journeyed beside Narog to his source in the falls of Ivlin. Beneath the shadowy mountains they came upon a company of orcs.
They heard a murmur hoarsely waft from far, a croaking laughter coming, now louder. Now they heard the drumming of hideous stamping feet that tramped the weary earth. Then many a lamp of sullen red they saw draw near, swinging and glistening on spear and scimitar. There hidden nigh they saw a band of orcs go by, with goblin faces swart and foul. Bats were about them, the voices died, the laughter like clash of stone and steel passed and faded. At their heel the elves and Beren crept more soft than foxes stealing through a croft in search of prey. Thus to the camp, lit by flickering fire and lamp, they stole, and counted sitting there full 30 orcs in the red flare of burning wood. Without a sound they one by one stood silent round, each in the shadow of a tree, each slowly, grimly, secretly, bent then his bow and drew the string. Hark, how they sudden twang and sing, when Felagund lets forth a cry, and 12 orcs sudden fall and die. Then forth they leap, casting their bows, out their bright swords, and swift their blows. The stricken orcs now shriek and yell as lost things deep in lightless hell. Battle there is beneath the trees, bitter and swift, but no orc flees. There left their lives that wandering band, and stained no more the sorrowing land with rape and murder. Yet no song of joy or triumph over wrong the elves there sang. In peril sore they were, for never alone to war so small an orc band went, they knew. Swiftly the raiment off they drew, and cast the corpses in a pit. This desperate counsel had the wit of Felagund for them devised, as orcs his comrades he disguised. The poisoned spears, the bows of horn, the crooked swords their foes had borne, they took, and loathing each him clad in Angband's raiment foul and sad. They smeared their hands and faces fair with pigment dark, the matted hair all lank and black from goblin head they shore. Then Felagund a spell did sing of changing and of shifting shape. Their ears grew hideous, and agape their mouths did start, and like a fang each tooth became, as slow he sang. Then they hid, and one by one behind him slid behind a foul and goblin thing, that once was elven fair and king. Northward they went, and orcs they met who passed, nor did their going let, but hailed them in greeting, and more bold they grew as past the long miles rolled. An eyelid hill there stood alone amid the valley, like a stone rolled from the mountains vast when giants in tumult hurtled past. Around its feet the river looped a stream divided, that had scooped the hanging edges into caves. There briefly shuddered Sirion's waves, and ran to other shores more clean. An elven watchtower had it been, and strong it was, and still was fair. But now did grim with menace stare one way to pale Beleriand, the other to that mournful land beyond the valley's northern mouth. Thence could be glimpsed the fields of drouth, the dusty dunes, the desert wide, and further far could be descried the brooding cloud that hangs and lowers on Thangorodrim's thunderous towers. Now in that hill was the abode of one most evil, and the road that from Beleriand thither came he watched with sleepless eyes of flame. Men called him Thu, and as a god in after days beneath his rod bewildered bowed to him, and made his ghastly temples in the shade. Not yet by men enthralled adored, now was he Morgoth's mightiest lord, master of wolves, whose shivering howl forever echoed in the hills, and foul enchantments and dark sigildry did weave and wield. In Glamory that necromancer held his hosts of phantoms and of wandering ghosts, of misbegotten or spell-wronged monsters that about him thronged, working his bidding dark and vile, the werewolves of the Wizard's Isle. From Thu their coming was not hid, and though beneath the eaves they slid of the forest's gloomy hanging boughs, he saw them afar, and wolves did rouse. "Go, fetch me those sneaking orcs," he said, "that fare thus strangely, as if in dread, and do not come, as all orcs use and are commanded, to bring me news of all their deeds, to me, to Thu." From his tower he gazed, and in him grew suspicion, and a brooding thought, waiting, leering, till they were brought. Now ringed about with wolves they stand, and fear their doom. Alas, the land of Narog left behind. Foreboding evil waits their mind, as downcast, halting, they must go and cross the stony bridge of woe to Wizard's Isle, and to the throne there fashioned of blood-darkened stone. "Where have ye been? What have ye seen?" "In Elfiness, and tears and distress, the fire blowing and the blood flowing, these have we seen. There have we been. 30 we slew and their bodies threw in a dark pit, The ravens sit and the owl cries where our swath lies. Come, tell me true, O Morgoth thralls, what then in Elfiness befalls? What of Nargothrond? Who reigneth there? Into that realm did your feet dare? Only its borders did we dare. There reigns King Felagund the Fair. Then heard ye not that he is gone, that Celegorm sits his throne upon? That is not true. If he is gone, then Orodreth sits his throne upon. Sharp are your ears. Swift have they got tidings of realms ye entered not. What are your names, O spearmen bold? Who your captain ye have not told? Nereb and Dungalef, and warriors 10, so we are called, and dark our den under the mountains. Over the waste we march on an errand of need and haste. Whom do ye serve, light or murk? Who is the maker of mightiest work? Who is the king of earthly kings, the greatest giver of gold and rings? Who is the master of the wide earth? Who despoiled them of their mirth, the greedy gods? Repeat your vows, orcs of Bauglir. Do not bend your brows. Death to light, to law, to love. Cursed be moon and stars above. May darkness everlasting old that waits outside in surges cold drown Manwë, Vardar, and the sun. May all in hatred be begun, and all in evil ended be, in the moaning of the endless sea. But no true man, nor elf yet free, would ever speak that blasphemy. And Beren muttered, Who is Thu to hinder work that is to do? Him we serve not, nor to him owe obeisance, and we now would go. Thu laughed. Patience, not very long shall ye abide. But first a song I will sing to you, to ears intent. Then his flaming eyes he on them bent, and darkness black fell round them all. Only they saw as through a pall of eddying smoke those eyes profound, in which their senses choked and drowned. He chanted a song of wizardry, of piercing, opening, of treachery, revealing, uncovering, betraying.
Then sudden Felagund there swaying, sang in answer a song of staying, resisting, battling against power, of secrets kept, strength like a tower, and trust unbroken, freedom, escape, of changing and of shifting shape, of snares eluded, broken traps, the prison opening, the chain that snaps. Backwards and forwards swayed their song, reeling and foundering as ever more strong, the chanting swelled. Felagund fought, and all the magic and might he brought of Elveness into his words. Softly in the gloom they heard the birds, singing afar in Nargothrond, the sighing of the sea beyond the western world, on sand of pearls in Elven land. Then the gloom gathered, darkness growing, in Valinor the red blood flowing. Beside the sea where the Noldor slew the foam riders and stealing drew their white ships with their white sails from lamplit havens, the wind wails, the wolf howls, the ravens flee, the ice mutters in the mouths of the sea, the captives sad in Angband mourn, thunder rumbles, the fires burn, and Finrod fell before the throne.
Behold, they are in their own fair shape, fair-skinned, bright-eyed. No longer gape orc-like their mouths, and now they stand betrayed into the wizard's hand. Thus came they unhappy into woe, to dungeons no hope nor glimmer know, where chained in chains that eat the flesh, and woven in webs of strangling mesh they lay forgotten, in despair. Yet not all unavailing were the spells of Felagund, for Thu neither their names nor purpose knew. These much he pondered and bethought, and in their woeful chains them sought, and threatened all with dreadful death, if one would not with traitor's breath reveal this knowledge. Wolves should come and slow devour them one by one before the others' eyes, and last should one alone be left aghast. Then in a place of horror hung with anguish should his limbs be wrung, in the bowels of the earth be slow, endlessly, cruelly, put to woe and torment, till he all declared. Even as he threatened, so it fared. From time to time in the eyeless dark 2 eyes would grow, and they would hark to frightful cries, and then a sound of rending, a slavering on the ground, and blood flowing they would smell. But none would yield, and none would tell.
Not far from the gates of Menigroth stood the greatest of all the trees in the forest of Neldoreth. This mighty beech was named Hirilorn, and it had 3 trunks, equal in girth, smooth in rind, and exceeding tall. Far aloft, between the shafts of Hirilorn, a wooden house was built, and there Luthien was made to dwell. In the time when Sauron cast Beren into the pit, a weight of horror came upon Luthien's heart. And going to Melian for counsel, she learned that Beren lay in the dungeons of Tol in Gauroth, without hope of rescue. Then Luthien, perceiving that no help would come from any other on earth, resolved to fly from Doriath and come herself to him. It is told in the Lay of Leithien how she escaped from the house in Hirilorn, for she put forth her arts of enchantment, and caused her hair to grow to great length, and of it she wove a dark robe that wrapped her beauty like a shadow, and it was laden with a spell of sleep. Of the strands that remained, she twined a rope, and she let it down from her window, and as the end swayed above the guards that sat beneath the tree, they fell into a deep slumber. Then Luthien climbed from her prison, and shrouded in her shadowy cloak, she escaped from all eyes, and vanished out of Doriath.
And by reason of the greater magic of her being, and because of the spell of wonder and of sleep that fared about her, no such dangers assailed her as did Beren before. Yet was it a long and evil and weary journey for a maiden to tread. How she escaped and came into the woods, and was found there by Celegorm as they hunted on the borders of Doriath, is told in the Lay of Leithien. They took her treacherously to Nargothrond, and Celegorm became enamoured of her beauty. From her tale they learned that Felagund was in the hands of Thu, and they purposed to let him perish there, and keep Luthien with them, and force Thingol to wed Luthien to Celegorm, and so build up their power and usurp Nargothrond, and become the mightiest of the princes of the Noldor. They did not think to go in search of the Silmarils, or suffer any others to do so, until they had all the power of the elves beneath themselves and obedient to them. But their designs came to naught, save estrangement and bitterness between the kingdoms of the elves. Hounds there were in Valinor with silver collars. Hart and boar, the fox and hare and nimble roe there in the forest's green did go. Orome was the lord divine of all those woods. The potent wine went in his halls and hunting song. And the elves anew have named him long Tavros, the god whose horns did blow over the mountains long ago, who alone of gods had loved the world before the banners were unfurled of moon and sun, and shod with gold were his great horses. Hounds untold, baying in woods beyond the west, of race immortal he possessed. Grey and limber, black and strong, white with silken coats and long, brown and brindled, swift and true as arrow from a bow of yew. Their voices like the deep-toned bells that ring in Valmar's citadels. Their eyes like living jewels, their teeth like rule bone. As sword from sheath they flashed and fled from leash to scent, for Tavros joy and merriment. In Tavros friths and pastures green had Huan once a young whelp been. He grew the swiftest of the swift, and Orome gave him as a gift to Celegorm, who loved to follow the great god's horn o'er hill and hollow. Alone of hounds of the land of light, when sons of Feanor took to flight and came into the north, he stayed beside his master. Every raid and every foray wild he shared, and into mortal battle dared. Often he saved his elvish lord from orc and wolf and leaping sword. A wolf-hound, tireless, grey and fierce, he grew. His gleaming eyes would pierce all shadows and all mist. The scent moons old he found through fen and bent, through rustling leaves and dusty sand. All paths of wide Beleriand he knew, but wolves he loved them best. He loved to find their throats and wrest their snarling lives and evil breath. The packs of Thu him feared as death. No wizardry, nor spell, nor dart, no fang, nor venom devil's art could brew had harmed him, for his weird was woven. Yet he little feared that fate decreed and known to all. Before the mightiest he should fall, before the mightiest wolf alone that ever was whelped in cave of stone. At Luthien's feet there day by day, and at night beside her couch would stay Huan the hound of Nargothrond, and words she spoke to him soft and fond. O Huan, Huan, swiftest hound that ever ran on mortal ground, what evil doth thy lords possess to heed no tears, nor my distress? Once Barahir all men above good hounds did cherish and did love. Once Beren in the friendless north, when outlaw wild he wandered forth, had friends unfailing among things with fur and fell and feathered wings, and among the spirits that in stone in mountains old and wastes alone still dwell. But now nor elf nor man, none save the child of Melian remembers him whom Morgoth fought, and never to thraldom base was brought. Naught said Huan, but Celegorm thereafter never near might win to Luthien, nor touch that maid, but shrank from Huan's fangs, afraid. Then on a night when autumn damp was swathed about the glimmering lamp of the wan moon, and fitful stars were flying seen between the bars of racing cloud, when winter's horn already wound in trees forlorn, lo, Huan was gone. Then Luthien lay, fearing new wrong, till just ere day, when all is dead and breathless still, and shapeless fears the sleepless fill, a shadow came along the wall. Then something let there softly fall her magic cloak beside her couch. Trembling she saw the great hound crouch beside her, heard a deep voice swell as from a tower a far slow bell. Thus Huan spake, who never before had uttered words, and but twice more did speak in elven tongue again. Lady beloved, whom all men, whom elfiness, and whom all things with fur and fell and feathered wings should serve and love, arise, away, put on thy cloak. Before the day comes over Nargothrond, we fly to northern perils, thou and I. And ere he ceased, he counsel wrought for achievement of the thing they sought. There Luthien listened in amaze, and softly on Huan did she gaze. Her arms about his neck she cast, in friendship that to death should last. In Wizard's Isle still lay forgot, enmeshed and tortured in that grot, cold, evil, doorless, without light, and blank-eyed stared at endless night, two comrades. Now alone they were, the others lived no more, but bare their broken bones would lie and tell how 10 had served their master well. The slow time passed. Then in the gloom 2 eyes there glowed. He saw his doom, barren, silent, as his bonds he strained beyond his mortal might enchained. Lo, sudden there was rending sound of chains that parted and unwound, of meshes broken. Forth there leapt upon the wolvish thing that crept in shadow, faithful Felagund, careless of fang or mortal wound. There in the dark they wrestled slow, remorseless, snarling, to and fro, teeth in flesh, gripe on throat, fingers locked in shaggy coat, spurning Beren who there lying heard the werewolf, gasping, dying. Then a voice he heard, "Farewell. On earth I need no longer dwell, friend and comrade, Beren bold. My heart is burst, my limbs are cold. Here all my power I have spent to break my bonds, and dreadful rent of poisoned teeth is in my breast. I now must go to my long rest in timeless halls where drink the gods, where the light falls upon the shining sea." Thus died the king, as elvish harpers yet do sing. There Beren lies, his grief no tear, his despair no horror has nor fear, waiting for footsteps, a voice, for doom. The silences were sudden shivered to silver fragments, and over all the silver fire that once men named the burning briar, the 7 stars that Varda set about the north were burning yet, a light in darkness, hope in woe, the emblem vast of Morgoth's foe. Then in his dream it seemed he sang, and loud and fierce his chanting rang, old songs of battle in the north, of breathless deeds, of marching forth to dare uncounted odds, and break great powers and towers, and strong walls shake. Huan, Huan, I hear a song far under welling, far but strong, a song that Beren bore aloft. I hear his voice. I have heard it oft in dream and wandering. Whispering low, thus Luthien spake. On the bridge of woe in mantle wrapped at dead of night she sat and sang, and to its height and to its depth the Wizard's Isle, rock upon rock and pile on pile, trembling echoed. The werewolves howled, and Huan hidden lay and growled, watchful listening in the dark, waiting for battle cruel and stark.
Come ye hunters all, and heed my bay. Do ye ride before the break of day, through woven woods in elven lands, to find the starry jewel at hand? Beware the wolf in darkness born, his eyes of fire, his mane of scorn, his savage fell, his rending claw but most beware his crushing jaw.
Thu heard that voice, and sudden stood wrapped in his cloak and sable hood in his high tower. He listened long, and smiled, and knew that elvish song. Ah, little Luthien, what brought the foolish fly to web unsought? Morgoth, a great and rich reward to me thou wilt owe when to thy hoard this jewel is added. Down he went, and forth his messengers he sent. Still Luthien sang. A creeping shape with blood-red tongue and jaws agape stole on the bridge, but she sang on, with trembling limbs and wide eyes wan. The creeping shape leapt to her side, and gasped, and sudden fell and died.
Love escaped upon my shadowed back, in trespass of the woven track, in fearsome fight of fang and claws, such howling carve these canyon walls. Beware the wolf, in darkness born, his eyes of fire, his mien of scorn, his savage fell, his rending claw, but most beware his crushing jaw. All until my day, let us ride before the break of day, through woven woods in elven lands, to find the starry jewel at hand. Beware the wolf, in darkness born, his eyes of fire, his mien of scorn, his savage fell, his rending claw, but most beware his crushing jaw. Hunters all until my bay, let us ride before the break of day, and course behind the wilding pack, in trespass of the woven track. Beware the wolf, in darkness born, his eyes of fire, his mien of scorn, his savage fell, his rending claw, but most beware his crushing jaw.
And still they came, still one by one, and each was seized, and there were none returned with padding feet to tell that a shadow lurketh fierce and fell at the bridge's end, and that below the shuddering waters loathing flow o'er the grey corpses Huan killed. A mightier shadow slowly filled the narrow bridge, a slavering hate, an awful werewolf, fierce and great, pale Draugluin, the old grey lord of wolves and beasts of blood abhorred, that fed on flesh of man and elf, beneath the chair of Thu himself. No more in silence did they fight. Howling and baying smote the night, till back by the chair where he had fed to die the werewolf yammering fled. "Huan is there," he gasped, and died. And Thu was filled with wrath and pride. "Before the mightiest he shall fall, before the mightiest wolf of all," so thought he now, and thought he knew how fate long spoken should come true. Thus came Thu, as wolf more great than e'er was seen from Angban's gate to the burning south, than ever lurked in mortal lands or murder worked. Sudden he sprang, and Huan leapt aside in shadow. On he swept to Luthien, lying swooning faint. To her drowning senses came the taint of his foul breathing, and she stirred. Dizzily she spake a whispered word. Her mantle brushed across his face. He stumbled, staggering in his pace. Out leapt Huan. Back he sprang. Beneath the stars there shuddering rang the cry of hunting wolves at bay, the tongue of hounds that fearless slay. No wizardry, nor spell, nor dart, no fang, nor venom, nor devil's art could harm that hound that hart and boar had hunted once in Valinor. Backward and forth they leapt and ran, fainting to flee, and round they span, and bit and grappled, and fell and rose. Then suddenly Huan holds and throws his ghastly foe. His throat he rends, choking his life. Not so it ends. From shape to shape, from wolf to worm, from monster to his own demon form, Thu changes, but that desperate grip he cannot shake, nor from it slip. Nigh the foul spirit Morgoth made and bred of evil, shuddering strayed from its dark house, when Luthien rose and shivering looked upon his throes. O demon dark, O phantom vile of foulness wrought, of lies and guile, here shalt thou die, thy spirit roam quaking back to thy master's home his scorn and fury to endure. Thee he will in the bowels immure of groaning earth, and in a hole everlastingly thy naked soul shall wail and gibber. This shall be, unless the keys thou render me of thy black fortress, and the spell that bindeth stone to stone thou tell, and speak the words of opening. With gasping breath and shuddering he spake, and yielded as he must, and vanquished betrayed his master's trust. Lo, by the bridge a gleam of light, like stars descended from the night to burn and tremble here below. There wide her arms did Luthien throw, and called aloud with voice as clear as still at whiles may mortal hear long elvish trumpets o'er the hill echo, when all the world is still. The dawn peered over mountains wan, their grey heads silent looked thereon. The hill trembled, the citadel crumbled, and all its towers fell. The rocks yawned, and the bridge broke, and Sirion spumed in sudden smoke. Like ghosts the owls were flying seen, hooting in the dawn, and bats unclean went skimming dark through the cold airs, shrieking thinly to find new lairs in deadly nightshades' branches dread. The wolves, whimpering and yammering, fled like dusky shadows. Out there creep pale forms and ragged as from sleep, crawling and shielding blinded eyes. The captives, in fear and in surprise from dollar-long in clinging night, beyond all hope set free to light. A vampire shape with pinions vast, screeching, leapt from the ground and passed, its dark blood dripping on the trees, and Huan neath him lifeless sees a wolvish corpse, for Thu had flown to Tower Nafuin, a new throne and darker stronghold there to build. The captives came and wept and shrilled their piteous cries of thanks and praise, but Luthien, anxious gazing, stays. Beren comes not. At length she said, Huan, Huan, among the dead must we then find him whom we sought, for love of whom we toiled and fought? Then side by side from stone to stone o'er Sirion they climbed. Alone, unmoving, they him found, who mourned by Felagund, and never turned to see what feet drew halting nigh. "Ah, Beren, Beren," came her cry, "almost too late have I thee found? Alas, that here upon the ground the noblest of the noble race in vain thy anguish doth embrace. Alas, in tears that we should meet, who once found meeting passing sweet." Her voice such love and longing filled, he raised his eyes, his mourning stilled, and felt his heart new turned to flame for her that through peril to him came. O Luthien, O Luthien, more fair than any child of men, O loveliest maid of Elfiness, what might of love did thee possess to bring thee here to terror's lair? O lissom limbs and shadowy hair, O flower-entwined brows so white, O slender hands in this new light. She found his arms, and swooned away, just at the rising of the day.
But Beren, coming back to the light out of the pits of despair, lifted her up, and they looked again upon one another, and the day rising over the dark hills shone upon them. They buried the body of Felagund upon the hilltop of his own isle, and it was clean again, and the green grave of Finrod Finarfin's son, fairest of all the princes of the elves, remained inviolate until the land was changed and broken, and foundered under destroying seas. But Finrod walks with Finarfin his father beneath the trees in Eldamar. Now Beren and Luthien to Nuviel went free again, and together walked through the woods, renewing for a time their joy. And though winter came, it hurt them not, for flowers lingered where Luthien went, and the birds sang beneath the snow-clad hills. But Huan, being faithful, went back to Celegorm his master, yet their love was less than before. There was tumult in Nargothrond, for thither now returned many elves that had been prisoners in the Isle of Sauron, and a clamour arose that no words of Celegorm could still. They lamented bitterly the fall of Felagund their king, saying that a maiden had dared that which the sons of Feanor had not dared to do. But many perceived that it was treachery rather than fear that had guided Celegorm and Curufin. Therefore the hearts of the people of Nargothrond were released from their dominion, and they obeyed Orodreth. But he would not suffer them to slay the brothers, as some desired, for the spilling of kindred blood by kin would bind the curse of Mandos more closely upon them all. Yet neither bread nor rest would he grant to Celegorm and Curufin within his realm. And he swore that there should be little love between Nargothrond and the sons of Feanor thereafter. "Let it be so," said Celegorm, and there was a light of menace in his eyes, but Curufin smiled. Then they took horse and rode away like fire, to find if they might their kindred in the east. But none would go with them, not even those that were of their own people, for all perceived that the curse lay heavily upon the brothers, and that evil followed them. In that time, Celebrimbor, the son of Curufin, repudiated the deeds of his father, and remained in Nargothrond. Yet Huan followed still the horse of Celegorm, his master. Northward they rode, for they intended in their haste to pass through Dimbar, and along the north marches of Doriath, seeking the swiftest road to Himring, where Maedhros their brother dwelt. And still they might hope with speed to traverse it, since it lay close to Doriath's borders, shunning Nan Dungortheb and the distant menace of the Mountains of Terror. Upon Doriath evil days had fallen. Grief and silence had come upon all its people when Luthien was lost. Long they had sought for her in vain, and it is told that in that time Daeron the minstrel of Thingol strayed from the land and was seen no more. He it was that made music for the dance and song of Luthien before Beren came to Doriath, and he had loved her and set all his thought of her in his music. He became the greatest of all the minstrels of the elves east of the sea, named even before Maglor, son of Feanor. In that time, Thingol turned to Melian, but now she withheld her counsel from him, saying that the doom that he had devised must work to its appointed end, and that he must wait now upon time. But Thingol learned that Luthien had journeyed far from Doriath, for messages came secretly from Celegorm, as has been told, saying that Felagund was dead, and Beren was dead, but Luthien was in Nargothrond, and that Celegorm would wed her. Then Thingol was wrathful, and he sent forth spies, thinking to make war upon Nargothrond. And thus he learned that Luthien was again fled, and that Celegorm and Curufin were driven from Nargothrond. Then his counsel was in doubt, for he had not the strength to assail the 7 sons of Feanor, but he sent messengers to Himring to summon their aid in seeking for Luthien, since Celegorm had not sent her to the house of her father, nor had he kept her safely. Now it is told that Beren and Luthien came in their wandering into the forest of Brethil, and drew near at last to the borders of Doriath. Then Beren took thought of his vow, and against his heart he resolved, when Luthien was come again within the safety of her own land, to set forth once more. But she was not willing to be parted from him again, saying, "You must choose, Beren, between these two. To relinquish the quest and your oath and seek a life of wandering upon the face of the earth, or to hold to your word and challenge the power of darkness upon its throne, but on either road I shall go with you, and our doom shall be alike." Even as they spoke together of these things, walking without heed of aught else, Celegorm and Curufin rode up, hastening through the forest, and the brothers espied them and knew them from afar. Then Celegorm turned his horse and spurred it upon Beren, purposing to ride him down. But Curufin, swerving, stooped and lifted Luthien to his saddle, for he was a strong and cunning horseman. Then Beren sprang from before Celegorm full upon the speeding horse of Curufin that had passed him. And the leap of Beren is renowned among men and elves. He took Curufin by the throat from behind, and hurled him backward, and they fell to the ground together. The horse reared and fell, but Luthien was flung aside and lay upon the grass. Then Beren throttled Curufin. But death was near him, for Celegorm rode upon him with a spear. In that hour, Huan forsook the service of Celegorm, and sprang upon him, so that his horse swerved aside and would not approach Beren because of the terror of the great hound. Celegorm cursed both hound and horse, but Huan was unmoved. Then Luthien, rising, forbade the slaying of Curufin, but Beren despoiled him of his gear and weapons and took his knife, Angrist. That knife was made by Telcha of Nogrod, and hung sheathless by his side. Iron it would cleave as if it were green wood. Then Beren, lifting Curufin, flung him from him, and bade him walk now back to his noble kinsfolk, who might teach him to turn his valor to worthier use. "Your horse," he said, "I keep for the service of Luthien, and it may be accounted happy to be free of such a master." Then Curufin cursed Beren under cloud and sky. "Go hence," he said, "unto a swift and bitter death." Celegorm took him beside him on his horse, and the brothers made then as if to ride away. And Beren turned away and took no heed of their words. But Curufin, being filled with shame and malice, took the bow of Celegorm, and shot back as they went, and the arrow was aimed at Luthien. Huan, leaping, caught it in his mouth. But Curufin shot again, and Beren sprang before Luthien, and the dart smote him in the breast. It is told that Huan pursued the sons of Feanor, and they fled in fear, and returning he brought to Luthien a herb out of the forest. With that leaf she staunched Beron's wound, and by her arts and by her love she healed him. And thus at last they returned to Doriath. There Beron, being torn between his oath and his love, and knowing Tinuviel to be now safe, arose one morning before the sun, and committed her to the care of Huan. Then in great anguish he departed while she yet slept upon the grass. He rode northward again with all speed to the pass of Sirion, and coming to the skirts of Tower Nufuin, he looked out across the waste of Angfauglith, and saw afar the peaks of Thangorodrim. There he dismissed the horse of Curufin, and bade it leave now dread and servitude, and run free upon the green grass in the lands of Sirion. Then being now alone, and upon the threshold of the final peril, he made the song of parting, in praise of Luthien and the lights of heaven, for he believed that he must now say farewell to both love and light.
There still sat Beron, and he sang, and loud his lonely singing rang. Though orcs should hear, or wolf prowl, or any of the creatures foul within the shade that slunk and stared of Tower Nafuin, naught he cared, who now took leave of light and day, grim-hearted, bitter, fierce and fey. Farewell now hear, ye leaves of trees, your music in the morning breeze. Farewell now blade and bloom and grass that see the changing seasons pass. Ye waters murmuring over stone, and meres that silent stand alone. Farewell now mountain, vale and plain. Farewell now wind and frost and rain, and mist and cloud, and heaven's air. Ye star and moon so blinding fair that still shall look down from the sky on the wide earth, though Beron die. Though Beron die not, and yet deep, deep, whence comes of those that weep no dreadful echo, lie and choke in everlasting dark and smoke. Farewell sweet earth, and northern sky, for ever blessed, since here did lie and here with lissom limbs did run, beneath the moon, beneath the sun, Luthien Tinuviel, more fair than mortal tongue can tell. Though all to ruin fell the world, and were dissolved and backward hurled unmade into the old abyss, yet were its making good for this, the dawn, the dusk, the earth, the sea, that Luthien on a time should be. His blade he lifted high in hand, and challenging alone did stand before the threat of Morgoth's power, and dauntless cursed him, hall and tower, or shadowing hand and grinding foot, beginning, end, and crown and root, then turned to strike forth down the slope, abandoning fear, forsaking hope. "Ah, Beron, Beron," came a sound, "almost too late have I thee found. O proud and fearless hand and heart, not yet farewell, not yet we part." Thus back to him came Luthien. They met beyond the ways of men. Upon the brink of terror stood between the desert and the wood. He looked on her, her lifted face beneath his lips in sweet embrace. "Thrice now mine oath I curse," he said, "that under shadow thee hath led. But where is Huan? Where the hound to whom I trusted, whom I bound by love of thee to keep thee well from deadly wandering into hell?" "I know not. But good Huan's heart is wiser, kinder than thou art, grim lord, more open unto prayer. Yet long and long I pleaded there, until he brought me, as I would, upon thy trail. Ere long they knew, for Huan came, his great breath panting, eyes like flame, in fear lest her whom he forsook to aid some hunting, evil took ere he was nigh. Now there he laid before their feet, as dark as shade, a wolf-hame huge. Its savage fell was long and matted, dark the spell that drenched the dreadful coat and skin, the werewolf cloak of Draugluin. The other was a bat-like garb with mighty fingered wings, a barb like iron nail at each joint's end, such wings as their dark cloud extend against the moon when in the sky from deadly nightshade screeching fly Thu's messengers. What hast thou brought, good Huan? What thy hidden thought? Thus Beren spoke, and once more words in Huan woke. His voice was like the deep-toned bells that ring in Valmar's citadels. Of one fair gem thou must be thief, Morgoth's or Thingol's, loath or lief. Thou must here choose twixt love and oath. If vow to break is still thee loath, then Luthien must either die alone, or death with thee defy beside thee, marching on your fate that hidden before you lies in wait. Hopeless the quest, but not yet mad, unless thou, Beren, run thus clad in mortal raiment, mortal hue, witless and reedless, death to woo. To such dark straits, alas, now brought are ye I love, for whom I fought. Nor further with you can I go. Whoever did a great hound know in friendship at a werewolf's side to Angban's grinning portal stride? Yet my heart tells that at the gate what there ye find, 'twill be my fate myself to see, though to that door my feet shall bear me nevermore. They stood and marvelled thus to hear his mighty tongue so deep and clear. Then sudden he vanished from their sight, even at the onset of the night. His dreadful counsel then they took, and their own gracious forms forsook. In werewolf fell and bat-like wing prepared to robe them, shuddering. With elvish magic Luthien wrought, lest raiment foul with evil fraught to dreadful madness drive their hearts. And there she wrought with elvish arts a strong defence, a binding power, singing until the midnight hour. Swift as the wolvish coat he wore, Beren lay slavering on the floor, red-tongued and hungry. But there lies a pain and longing in his eyes, a look of horror as he sees a bat-like form crawl to its knees and drag its creased and creaking wings. Then, howling under moon, he springs 4-footed, swift from stone to stone, from hill to plain, but not alone. A dark shape down the slope doth skim, and wheeling flitters over him.
They passed through all perils, until they came with the dust of their long and weary road upon them, to the drear dale that lay before the gate of Angband. Black chasms opened beside the road, whence forms as of writhing serpents issued. On either hand the cliffs stood as embattled walls, and upon them sat carrion fowl, crying with fell voices. Before them was the impregnable gate, an arch wide and dark at the foot of the mountain. Above it reared 1,000 feet of precipice. There dismay took them, for at the gate was a guard of whom no tidings had yet gone forth. Rumour of he knew not what designs abroad among the princes of the elves had come to Morgoth, and ever down the aisles of the forest was heard the baying of Huan, the great hound of war whom long ago the Valar unleashed. Then Morgoth recalled the doom of Huan, and he chose one from among the whelps of the race of Draugluin, and he fed him with his own hand upon living flesh, and put his power upon him. Swiftly the wolf grew, until he could creep into no den, but lay huge and hungry before the feet of Morgoth. There the fire and anguish of hell entered into him, and he became filled with a devouring spirit, tormented, terrible, and strong. Carcharoth, the Red Moor, he is named in the tales of those days. And Morgoth set him to lie unsleeping before the doors of Angband, lest Huan come. Now Carcharoth espied them from afar, and he was filled with doubt. For news had long been brought to Angband that Thraugluin was dead. Therefore, when they approached, he denied them entry and bade them stand, and he drew near with menace, scenting something strange in the air about them. But suddenly some power descended from of old, from divine race, possessed Luthien, and casting back her foul raiment she stood forth, small before the might of Carcharoth, but radiant and terrible. Lifting up her hand, she commanded him to sleep, saying, O woe-begotten spirit, fall now into dark oblivion, and forget for a while the dreadful doom of life. And Carcharoth was felled, as though lightning had smitten him. Then Beren and Luthien went through the gate, and down the labyrinthine stairs, and together wrought the greatest deed that has been dared by elves or men.
The arch behind of twilit shade they saw recede and dwindling fade. The thunderous forge's rumour grew, a burning wind there roaring blew foul vapours up from gaping holes. Huge shapes there stood like carven trolls, enormous hewn of blasted rock to forms that mortal likeness mock. Monstrous and menacing, entombed. At every turn they silent loomed in fitful glares that leapt and died. There hammers clanged, and tongues there cried with sound like smitten stone. There wailed faint from far under, called and failed amid the iron clink of chain, voices of captives put to pain. Loud rose a din of laughter hoarse, self-loathing yet without remorse. Loud came a singing harsh and fierce, like swords of terror's souls to pierce. Red was the glare through open doors of firelight mirrored on brazen floors. And up the arches towering clomb to glooms unguessed, to vaulted domes swathed in wavering smokes and steams, stabbed with flickering lightning gleams. To Morgoth's hall, where dreadful feast he held, and drank the blood of beast and lives of men, they stumbling came. Their eyes were dazed with smoke and flame. The pillars reared like monstrous shores to bear earth's overwhelming floors, were devil-carven, shaped with skill such as unholy dreams doth fill. They towered like trees into the air, whose trunks are rooted in despair, whose shade is death, whose fruit is bane, whose boughs like serpents writhe in pain. Beneath them, ranged with spear and sword, stood Morgoth's sable-armoured horde. The fire on blade and boss of shield was red as blood on stricken field. Beneath a monstrous column loomed the throne of Morgoth, and the doomed and dying gasped upon the floor, his hideous footstool, rape of war. About him sat his awful thanes, the Balrog lords with fiery manes, red-handed, mouthed with fangs of steel. Devouring wolves were crouched at heel. And o'er the host of hell there shone with a cold radiance, clear and wan, the Silmarils, the gems of fate, imprisoned in the crown of hate. Lo, through the grinning portals dread, sudden a shadow swooped and fled, and Beren gasped. He lay alone with crawling belly on the stone. A form bat-winged, silent, flew where the huge pillared branches grew, amid the smokes and mounting steams. And as on the margin of dark dreams a dim-felt shadow unseen grows to cloud of vast unease, and woes foreboded, nameless, roll like doom upon the soul, so in that gloom the voices fell, and laughter died slow to silence, many-eyed. A nameless doubt, a shapeless fear had entered in their caverns drear, and grew, and towered above them cowed, hearing in heart the trumpets loud of gods forgotten. Morgoth spoke, and thunderous the silence broke. "Shadow, descend!" and do not think to cheat mine eyes. In vain to shrink from thy lord's gaze or seek to hide. My will by none may be defied. Hope nor escape doth here await those that unbidden pass my gate. Descend, ere anger blast thy wing, thou foolish, frail, bat-shapen thing, and yet not bat within. Come down! Slow wheeling o'er his iron crown, reluctantly, shivering and small, Beren there saw the shadow fall and droop before the hideous throne, a weak and trembling thing, alone. And as thereon great Morgoth bent his darkling gaze, he shuddering went, belly to earth, the cold sweat dank upon his fell, and crawling shrank beneath the darkness of that seat, beneath the shadow of those feet. Tinuviel spake, a shrill, thin sound piercing those silences profound. A lawful errand here me brought. From Thu's dark mansions have I sought, from Tower Nafuin's shade I fare, to stand before thy mighty chair. Thy name, thou shrieking waif, thy name! Tidings enough from Thu there came but short while since. What would he now? Why send such messenger as thou? Thuringwethil I am, who cast a shadow o'er the face aghast of the sallow moon in the doomed land of shivering Beleriand. Liar art thou, who shalt not weave deceit before mine eyes. Now leave thy form and raiment false, and stand revealed and delivered to my hand. There came a slow and shuddering change. The bat-like raiment, dark and strange, was loosed, and slowly shrank and fell, quivering. She stood revealed in hell. About her slender shoulders hung her shadowy hair, and round her clung her garment dark, where glimmered pale the starlight caught in magic veil. Dim dreams and faint oblivious sleep fell softly thence. In dungeons deep an odour stole of elven flowers, from elven dells where silver showers drip softly through the evening air, and round there crawled with greedy stare dark shapes of snuffling hunger dread. With arms upraised and drooping head, then softly she began to sing a theme of sleep and slumbering, wandering, woven with deeper spell than songs wherewith in ancient dell Melian did once the twilight fill, profound and fathomless and still. The fires of Angband flared and died, smouldered into darkness. Through the wide and hollow halls there rolled unfurled the shadows of the underworld. All movement stayed, and all sound ceased, save vaporous breath of orc and beast. One fire in darkness still abode. The lidless eyes of Morgoth glowed. One sound the breathing silence broke. The mirthless voice of Morgoth spoke. So, Luthien, a liar like all elves and men. Yet welcome, welcome to my hall. I have a use for every thrall. What news of Thingol in his hole, shy lurking like a timid vole? What folly fresh is in his mind, who cannot keep his offspring blind from straying thus, or can devise no better counsel for his spies? She wavered, and she stayed her song. The road, she said, was wild and long, but Thingol sent me not, nor knows what way his rebellious daughter goes. Yet every road and path will lead northward at last, and here of need I trembling come with humble brow, and here before thy throne I bow. For Luthien hath many arts for solace sweet, of kingly hearts. And here of need thou shalt remain, now, Luthien, in joy or pain, the fitting doom for all, for rebel, thief, and upstart thrall. Of what avail here dost thou deem thy babbling song and foolish laughter? Minstrels strong are at my call, yet I will give a respite brief, a while to live, a little while, though purchased dear, to Luthien the fair and clear, a pretty toy for idle hour. In slothful gardens many a flower like thee the amorous gods are used honey-sweet to kiss, and who would not taste the honey-sweet lying to lips, or crush with feet the soft cool tissue of pale flowers, easing like gods the dragging hours? Ah, curse the gods! O hunger dire! O blinding thirst's unending fire! In his eyes the fire to flame was fanned, and forth he stretched his brazen hand. Luthien, as shadow, shrank aside. "Not thus, O king, not thus," she cried, "do great lords hark to humble boon. For every minstrel hath his tune, and some are strong, and some are soft, and each would bear his song aloft, and each a little while be heard, though rude the note and light the word. But Luthien hath cunning arts for solace sweet of kingly hearts. Now hearken." And her wings she caught then deftly up, and swift as thought slipped from his grasp, and wheeling round, fluttering before his eyes, she wound a mazy winged dance, and sped about his iron-crowned head. Suddenly her song began anew, and soft came dropping like a dew down from on high in that domed hall, her voice bewildering, magical. And grew to silver murmuring streams, pale falling in dark pools in dreams. She let her flying raiment sweep, enmeshed with woven spells of sleep, as round the dark void she ranged and reeled. From wall to wall she turned and wheeled in dance, such as never elf nor fay before devised, nor since that day. Than swallow swifter, than flittermouse in dying light round darkened house, more silken soft, more strange and fair than sylphine maidens of the air, whose wings in Varda's heavenly hall in rhythmic movement beat and fall. Down crumpled Orc and Balrog proud, all eyes were quenched, all heads were bowed, the fires of heart and maw were stilled, and ever like a bird she thrilled above a lightless world forlorn, in ecstasy enchanted borne. All eyes were quenched, save those that glared in Morgoth's lowering brows, and stared in slowly wandering wonder round, and slow were in enchantment bound. Their will wavered, and their fire failed, and as beneath his brows they paled, the Silmarils like stars were kindled, that in the reek of earth had dwindled, escaping upwards clear to shine, glistening marvellous in heaven's mine. Then flaring suddenly they fell, down, down upon the floors of hell. The dark and mighty head was bowed, like mountain top beneath a cloud the shoulders founded. The vast form crashed, as in overwhelming storm huge cliffs in ruin slide and fall. And prone lay Morgoth in his hall. His crown there rolled upon the ground, a wheel of thunder. Then all sound died, and a silence grew as deep as were the heart of earth asleep.
As a dead beast, Beren lay upon the ground. But Luthien, touching him with her hand, aroused him, and he cast aside the wolf-hame. Then he drew forth the knife Angrist, and from the iron claws that held it, he cut a Silmaril. As he closed it in his hand, the radiance welled through his living flesh, and his hand became as a shining lamp. But the jewel suffered his touch and hurt him not. It came then into Beren's mind that he would go beyond his vow and bear out of Angband all 3 of the jewels of Feanor. But such was not the doom of the Silmarils. The knife Angrist snapped, and a shard of the blade flying smote the cheek of Morgoth. He groaned and stirred, and all the host of Angband moved in sleep. Then terror fell upon Beren and Luthien, and they fled, heedless and without disguise, desiring only to see the light once more. They were neither hindered nor pursued, but the gate was held against their going out. For Carcharoth had arisen from sleep, and stood now in wrath upon the threshold of Angband. Before they were aware of him, he saw them, and sprang upon them as they ran. Luthien was spent, and she had not time nor strength to quell the wolf, but Beren strode forth before her, and in his right hand he held aloft the Silmaril. Carcharoth halted, and for a moment he was afraid. "Get you gone and fly," cried Beren, "for here is a fire that shall consume you and all evil things." And he thrust the Silmaril before the eyes of the wolf. But Carcharoth looked upon that holy jewel and was not daunted, and the devouring spirit within him awoke to sudden fire, and gaping he took suddenly the hand within his jaws, and he bit it off at the wrist. Then swiftly all his innards were filled with a flame of anguish, and the Silmaril seared his accursed flesh. Howling he fled before them, and the walls of the Valley of the Gate echoed with the clamour of his torment. So terrible did he become in his madness, that all the creatures of Morgoth that abode in that valley, or were upon any of the roads that led thither, fled far away. For he slew all living things that stood in his path, and burst from the north with ruin upon the world. Of all the terrors that came ever into Beleriand ere Angband's fall, the madness of Carcharoth was the most dreadful, for the power of the Silmaril was hidden within him. In his madness he had run ravening from the north, and passing at length over Tower Nufuin, upon its eastern side, he came down from the sources of Esgalduin like a destroying fire. Nothing hindered him, and the might of Melian upon the borders of the land stayed him not. For fate drove him, and the power of the Silmaril that he bore to his torment. Thus he burst into the inviolate woods of Doriath, and all fled away in fear. Alone of the messengers, Mablung, chief captain of the king, escaped, and he brought the dread tidings to Thingol. Now Beren lay in a swoon within the perilous gate, and death drew nigh him, for there was venom on the fangs of the wolf. Luthien with her lips drew out the venom, and she put forth her failing power to staunch the hideous wound. But behind her, in the depths of Angband, the rumour grew of great wrath aroused. The hosts of Morgoth were awakened. Thus the quest of the Silmaril was like to have ended in ruin and despair. But in that hour above the wall of the valley, 3 mighty birds appeared, flying northward with wings swifter than the wind. Among all birds and beasts the wandering and need of Beren had been noised, and Huan himself had bidden all things watch, that they might bring him aid. High above the realm of Morgoth, Thorondor and his vassals soared, and seeing now the madness of the wolf and Beren's fall, they came swiftly down, even as the powers of Angband were released from the toils of sleep. Then they lifted up Luthien and Beren from the earth, and bore them aloft into the clouds. Below them suddenly thunder rolled, lightnings leapt upward, and the mountains quaked. Fire and smoke belched forth from Thangorodrim, and flaming bolts were hurled far abroad, falling ruinous upon the lands, and the Noldor in Hithlum trembled. But Thorondor took his way far above the earth, seeking the high roads of heaven, where the sun day-long shines unveiled, and the moon walks amid the cloudless stars. Thus they passed swiftly over Dor Nufauglyth, and over Tower Nufuin, and came above the hidden valley of Tumladen. No cloud nor mist lay there, and looking down, Luthien saw far below, as a white light starting from a green jewel, the radiance of Gondolin the Fair, where Turgon dwelt. But she wept, for she thought that Beren would surely die. He spoke no word, nor opened his eyes, and knew thereafter nothing of his flight. And at last the eagles set them down upon the borders of Doriath, and they were come to that same dell whence Beren had stolen in despair, and left Luthien asleep. There the eagles laid her at Beren's side, and returned to the peaks of Crisegrim and their high eyries. But Huan came to her, and together they tended Beren, even as before when she healed him of the wound that Curufin gave to him. But this wound was fell and poisonous. Long Beren lay, and his spirit wandered upon the dark borders of death, knowing ever an anguish that pursued him from dream to dream. Then suddenly, when her hope was almost spent, he woke again, and looked up, seeing leaves against the sky. And he heard beneath the leaves singing soft and slow beside him, Luthien Tinuviel. And it was spring again. Thereafter Beren was named Echamion, which is the one-handed, and suffering was graven in his face. But at last he was drawn back to life by the love of Luthien, and he arose, and together they walked in the woods once more. And they did not hasten from that place, for it seemed fair to them. Luthien indeed was willing to wander in the wild without returning, forgetting house and people and all the glory of the elf kingdoms, and for a time Beren was content.
Then did Tinuviel breathe freely once more, as she had not done since she fled from her father's halls. And Beren rested in the sun far from the glooms of Angband, until the last bitterness left him. Because of the light falling through green leaves and the whisper of clean winds and the song of birds, once more are they wholly unafraid. At last came there nevertheless a day whereon, waking out of a deep slumber, Beren started up as one who leaves a dream of happy things coming suddenly to his mind, and he said, "Farewell, O Huan, most trusty comrade, and thou, little Tinuviel, whom I love, fare thee well. This only I beg of thee, get thee now straight to the safety of thy home, and may good Huan lead thee. But lo, I must away into the solitude of the woods, for I have lost that Silmaril which I had, and never dare I draw near to Angband more." Then he wept to himself. But Tinuviel, who was nigh and had hearkened to his musing, came beside him and said, "And if thou dwellest in the woods, O Beren Echamion, then so will I. And if thou wilt wander in the wild places, there will I wander also, or with thee or after thee. Yet never shall my father see me again, save only if thou takest me to him." Then indeed was Beren glad of her sweet words, and fain would have dwelt with her as a huntsman of the wild, but his heart smote him for all that she had suffered for him, and for her he put away his pride. Indeed she reasoned with him, saying it would be folly to be stubborn, and that her father would greet them with naught but joy, being glad to see his daughter yet alive. "And may be," said she, "he will have shame that his jesting has given thy fair hand to the jaws of Carcharoth." But Huan also she implored to return with them a space. "For my father owes thee a very great reward, O Huan," saith she, "and he loves his daughter at all." So came it that those three set forward once again together, and came at last back to the woodlands that Tinuville knew and loved, nigh to the dwellings of her folk and to the deep halls of her home. Yet even as they approach, they find fear and tumult among that people, such as had not been for a long age. And asking some that wept before their doors, they learned that ever since the day of Luthien's secret flight, ill fortune had befallen them. Lo, the king had been distraught with grief, and had relaxed his ancient wariness and cunning. Indeed, his warriors had been sent hither and thither deep into the unwholesome woods, searching for that maiden, and many had been slain or lost forever, and war there was with Morgoth's servants about all their northern and eastern borders, so that the folk feared mightily lest that Ainu upraise his strength and come utterly to crush them, and Melian's magic have not the strength to withhold the numbers of the orcs. Behold, said they, now is the worst of all befallen. The woods are dreary, for Dairon comes not back, neither is his music heard ever in the glades. Behold now the crown of all our evil tidings, for know that there has broken upon us, raging from the halls of evil, a great grey wolf filled with an evil spirit, and he fares as though lashed by some hidden madness, and none are safe. Already has he slain many as he runs wildly snapping and yelling through the woods, so that the very banks of the stream that flows before the king's halls has become a lurking place of danger. There comes the awful wolf oftentimes to drink, with bloodshot eyes and tongue lolling out, and never can he slake his desire for water, as though some inward fire devours him. Then was Tinuville sad at the thought of the unhappiness that had come upon her folk, and most of all was her heart bitter at the story of Dairon, for of this she had not heard any murmur before. And together they made haste at the king, and already to the elves of the wood it seemed that the evil was at an end, now that Luthien was come back among them unharmed. Indeed, they scarce had hoped for that. In great gloom do they find King Thingol. Yet suddenly is his sorrow melted to tears of gladness, and Melian sings again for joy, when Luthien enters there, and casting away her raiment of dark mist, she stands before them in her pearly radiance of old. For a while all is mirth and wonder in that hall, and yet at length the king turns his eyes to Beren and says, So thou hast returned too, bringing a Silmaril beyond doubt in recompense for all the ill thou hast wrought my land? Or, an thou hast not, I know not wherefore thou art here. Then Tinuville stamped her foot, and cried so that the king and all about him wondered at her new and fearless mood. For shame, my father! Behold, here is Beren the Brave, whom thy jesting drove into dark places and foul captivity, and the Valar alone saved from a bitter death. Methinks 'twould rather befit a king of the Eldar to reward him than revile him. Nay, said Beren, the king thy father hath the right. Lord, said he, I have a Silmaril in my hand even now. Show me, then, said the king in amaze. That I cannot, said Beren, for my hand is not here. And he held forth his maimed arm. Then was the king's heart turned to him by reason of his stout and courteous demeanour, and he bade Beren and Luthien relate to him all that had befallen either of them. And he was eager to hearken, for he did not fully comprehend the meaning of Beren's words. When, however, he had heard all, yet more was his heart turned to Beren, and he marvelled at the love that had awakened in the heart of Tinuville, so that she had done greater deeds and more daring than any of the warriors of his folk. Never again, said he, O Beren, I beg of thee, leave this court nor the side of Tinuville, for thou art a great man, and thy name will ever be great among the kindreds. Yet Beren answered him proudly and said, Nay, O king, I hold to my word and thine, and I will get thee that Silmaril or ever I dwell in peace in thy halls. And the king entreated him to journey no more into the dark and unknown realms. But Beren said, No need is there thereof. For behold, that jewel is even now nigh to thy caverns. And he made clear to the king that the beast that ravaged his land was none other than Carcharoth, the wolf ward of Morgoth's gates.
But now a shadow fell upon the joy of Doriath at the return of Luthien the Fair. For learning of the cause of the madness of Carcharoth, the people grew the more afraid, perceiving that his danger was fraught with dreadful power, because of the holy jewel, and hardly might be overthrown. Therefore they prepared the hunting of the wolf, of all pursuits of beasts whereof tales tell the most perilous. To that chase went Huan the Hound of Valinor, and Mablung of the Heavy Hand, and Beleg Strongbow, and Beren Echamion, and Thingol, king of Doriath. They rode forth in the morning, and passed over the river Esgalduin, but Luthien Tinuviel remained behind at the gates of Menegroth. A dark shadow fell upon her, and it seemed to her that the sun had sickened and turned black. The hunters turned east and north, and following the course of the river, they came at last upon Carcharoth the wolf, in a dark valley down the northern side whereof Esgalduin fell in a torrent over steep falls. At the foot of the falls, Carcharoth drank to ease his consuming thirst, and he howled, and thus they were aware of him. But he, espying their approach, rushed not suddenly to attack them. It may be that the devil's cunning of his heart awoke, being for a moment eased of his pain by the sweet waters of Esgalduin. Beren stood beside Thingol, and suddenly they were aware that Huan had left their side. Then a great baying awoke in the thicket, for Huan, becoming impatient and desiring to look upon this wolf, had gone in alone to dislodge him. But Carcharoth avoided him, and bursting from the thorns leapt suddenly upon Thingol. Swiftly Beren strode before him with a spear, but Carcharoth swept it aside and felled him, biting at his breast. In that moment Huan leapt from the thicket upon the back of the wolf, and they fell together fighting bitterly. And no battle of wolf and hound has been like to it, for in the baying of Huan was heard the voice of the horns of Orome, and the wrath of the Valar. But in the howls of Carcharoth was the hate of Morgoth, and malice crueller than teeth of steel. And the rocks were rent by their clamour, and fell from on high, and choked the falls of Esgalduin. There they fought to the death. But Thingol gave no heed, for he knelt by Beren, seeing that he was sorely hurt. Huan in that hour slew Carcharoth. But there in the woven woods of Doriath his own doom long spoken was fulfilled, and he was wounded mortally, and the venom of Morgoth entered into him. Then he came, and falling beside Beren spoke for the third time with words, and he bade Beren farewell before he died. Beren spoke not, but laid his hand upon the head of the hound, and so they parted.
Love escaped upon my shadowed back, in trespass of the woven track, in fearsome fight of fang and claws. Such howling carve these canyon walls. Beware the wolf in darkness born, his eyes of fire, his mien of scorn, his savage fell, his rending claw, but most beware his crushing jaw. All and heed my bay. Let us ride before the break of day through woven woods in elven lands to find the starry jewel at hand. Let the swift not linger for the slow. Come ye hunters, ride the valley low to the pits beneath the iron crown, where the nameless man has been cast down. Hunters all unto my bay. Let us ride before the break of day, and course behind the wilding pack in trespass of the woven track. Beware the wolf in darkness born, his eyes of fire, his mien of scorn, his savage fell, his rending claw, but most beware his crushing jaw.
Mablung and Beleg came hastening to the king's aid, but when they looked upon what was done, they cast aside their spears and wept. Then Mablung took a knife, and ripped up the belly of the wolf, and within he was well nigh all consumed as with a fire. But the hand of Beren that held the jewel was yet incorrupt. But when Mablung reached forth to touch it, the hand was no more, and the Silmaril lay there unveiled, and the light of it filled the shadows of the forest all about them.
Then holding it out, he said, "Behold, O king!" But Thingol said, "Nay, never will I handle it, save only if Beren give it to me." But Beleg said, "And that seems like never to be unless ye tend him swiftly, for methinks he is hurt sorely." And Mablung and the king were ashamed. Therefore now they raised Beren gently up and tended him and washed him. And he breathed, but he spoke not nor opened his eyes. And when the sun arose and they had rested a little, they bore him as softly as might be upon a bier of boughs back through the woodlands. And nigh midday they drew near the homes of the folk again, and then were they deadly weary. And Beren had not moved nor spoken, but groaned thrice. There did all the people flock to meet them when their approach was noised among them. And some bore them meat and cool drinks, and salves and healing things for their hurts. And but for the harm that Beren had met, great indeed had been their joy. Now then they covered the leafy boughs wherein he lay with soft raiment, and they bore him away to the halls of the king, and there was Tinuviel awaiting them in great distress. And she fell upon Beren's breast, and wept and kissed him. And he awoke, and knew her. And after Mablung gave him that Silmaril, and he lifted it above him, gazing at its beauty, ere he said slowly and with pain, "Behold, O king, I give thee the wondrous jewel thou didst desire, and it is but a little thing found by the wayside, For once, methinks thou hadst one beyond thought more beautiful, and she is now mine. Yet even as he spake, the shadows of Mandos lay upon his face, and his spirit fled in that hour to the margin of the world. Where the forest stream went through the wood, and silent all the stems there stood of tall trees, moveless, hanging dark with mottled shadows on their bark above the green and gleaming river, there came through leaves a sudden shiver, a windy whisper through the still, cool silences, and down the hill, as faint as a deep sleeper's breath, an echo came as cold as death. Long are the paths of shadow made, where no foot's print is ever laid, over the hills, across the seas. Far, far away are the lands of ease, but the land of the lost is further yet, where the dead wait while ye forget. No moon is there, no voice, no sound of beating heart. A sigh profound once in each age, as each age dies, alone is heard. Far, far it lies, the land of waiting, where the dead sit, in their thoughts' shadow, by no moon lit.
They bore Beren, son of Barahir, to the feet of Hirilon the great beech, upon a bier of branches, with Huan the wolf-hound at his side, and some bore torches beside the bier. There she set her arms about Beren, and kissed him, bidding him await her beyond the western sea. But the starlight was quenched, and darkness had fallen even upon Luthien Tinuviel. Thus ended the quest of the Silmaril. But the lay of Leithian, release from bondage, does not end. For the spirit of Beren, at her bidding, tarried in the halls of Mandos, unwilling to leave the world, until Tinuviel came to say her last farewell upon the dim shores of the outer sea, whence men that die set out never to return. But the spirit of Luthien fell down into darkness, and at the last it fled, and her body lay like a flower that is suddenly cut off, and lies for a while unwithered on the grass. Then a winter, as it were the hoar age of mortal men, fell upon Thingol. But Tinuviel came to the halls of Mandos, where are the appointed places of the Elderlear, beyond the mansions of the west upon the confines of the world. There those that wait sit in the shadow of their thought. But her beauty was more than their beauty, and her sorrow deeper than their sorrows. And she knelt before Mandos, and sang to him. The song of Luthien Tinuviel before Mandos was the song most fair that ever in words was woven, and the song most sorrowful that ever the world shall hear. Unchanged, imperishable, it is sung still in Valinor beyond the hearing of the world, and listening, the Valar are grieved, for Luthien wove two themes of words, of the sorrow of the Eldar and the grief of men, of the two kindreds that were made by Iluvatar to dwell in Arda, the kingdom of earth, amid the innumerable stars. And as she knelt before him, her tears fell upon his feet like rain upon the stones, and Mandos was moved to pity, who never before was so moved, nor has been since. Therefore he summoned Beren, and even as Luthien had spoken in the hour of his death, they met again beyond the western sea. But Mandos had no power to withhold the spirits of men that were dead within the confines of the world after their time of waiting. Nor could he change the fates of the children of Iluvatar. He went therefore to Manwë, lord of the Valar, who governed the world under the hand of Iluvatar, and Manwë sought counsel in his inmost thought, where the will of Iluvatar was revealed. These were the choices that he gave to Luthien. Because of her labours and her sorrow, she should be released from Mandos, and go to Valimar, there to dwell until the world's end among the Valar, forgetting all griefs that her life had known. Thither Beren could not come, for it was not permitted to the Valar to withhold death from him, which is the gift of Iluvatar to men. But the other choice was this, that she might return to Middle-earth, and take with her Beren, there to dwell again, but without certitude of life or joy. Then she would become mortal, and subject to a second death, even as he. And ere long she would leave the world forever, and her beauty become only a memory in song. This doom she chose, forsaking the blessed realm, and putting aside all claim to kinship with those that dwell there, that thus whatever grief might lie in wait, the fates of Beren and Luthien might be joined, and their paths lead together beyond the confines of the world.
None the less those twain departed hand in hand, and they fared together through the northern woods, and oftentimes were they seen dancing magic dances down the hills, and their name became heard far and wide. And they wandered knowing thirst nor cold in the fair land of Beleriand, and no mortal man thereafter spoke to Beren or his spouse. So it was that alone of the Eldaliae Luthien died and left the world long ago. Yet by her have the two kindreds been joined, and she is the foremother of many.
In whom the Eldar see yet, though all the world is changed, the likeness of Luthien the beloved, whom they have lost.
Was the way that fate them bore, o'er stony mountains cold.